Good morning. Welcome to Director's Cut. Thank you for tuning in. We'll begin with Director of Mineral Resources, Dr. Lynn Helms, who will begin with the production.
Thank you, Bridget. So here we are, June of 2024. We're talking April production numbers. This will be my last Director's Cut. So 138, our data guy tells me. This is number 138 for Director's Cuts. I really appreciate our North Dakota news media for suggesting that we do this. During the boom in 2012, media requests were frantic, as you might guess, and they weren't all getting fulfilled. So you all came up with the idea of something like this, where everybody was invited and everybody could ask questions. And it was a brilliant idea. We really appreciate that. Let's dive into the April numbers for just a minute, and then we can go nostalgic if we want, but we did already get some questions over the internet that I'll try to take care of as well. So production didn't quite reach that 1.3 million barrels a day that I've been watching for, 1.241 in April. So healthy production, up 1% from March. And as you know, in April, we were still working our way out of winter. So May, we should see healthier, stronger numbers. That's what the daily gas nominations are indicating to us. Gas production up much stronger. Natural gas production went up 3%, and so you're actually seeing that gas oil ratio start to increase again, with 3 times the increase in natural gas production that we saw as an increase in oil. So that Tier 2 and Tier 3 geology is starting to see the impacts of drilling and development, and some exciting technologies taking place there. Rig count, very steady. I did get a call last week from some representatives from our 5 largest oil and gas companies, and they were letting me know that the cycle time this year is about 10 to 15% shorter drilling wells than it was a year ago. So they are anxious about what we're going to do to make sure that we've got permits and that activity can continue to grow. What does that mean? That means that they've gone from 8 or 9 days to drill a 2-mile lateral down to 7 or 8 days. So they're drilling 2-mile laterals in a week now, from spud to TD. And so that cycle time continues to accelerate. The rigs are bigger and stronger and faster, and we're going to have to step up in order to keep up with that. If we want to see our production grow to that 1.4 million barrels a day, we're going to need to keep up with that number. And so we've already started talking about asking the legislature for some more permitting staff, so that we can do things right, but do more and still continue to do it right. So that's exciting to see that. That really supports that concept that we're going to see 1 to 2% growth in our production every year from here over the next 10 to 15 years. We permitted 4 4-mile laterals now. So we've issued in this last month, we've issued our first 4-mile lateral permits. And that's pretty groundbreaking. Lots of 3-mile laterals being drilled out there. Like we've said, about 75% of the permits are for 3-mile long laterals, but we're now permitting 4-mile long wells. So we'll see how that technology works out. They just completed, after the Williston Basin Conference, those first 2 switchback wells, and we've got another company that has permitted a switchback well. So I don't have the results on the flowback yet. They fracked the wells, but they haven't started the flowback. So I don't know the results or how those wells are performing, but the frack jobs went fine. And so it's possible to drill a mile in one direction, make a 180-degree turn, and drill a mile back in the other direction, hydraulically fracture that well, and get ready to put it on production. Pretty exciting technology developments going on. Permitting of wells, we hit 95, so we're in the zone. We need 90 to 100 permits a month if we're going to grow production at that 1 to 2% level. So we're pushing our permitting staff really hard. And like I said, we're going to be seeking maybe a little bit more staff to help out in that area. May saw 67 completions. We need 90 to 100 for that production growth. Wells waiting on completion steady. We've exhausted our supply of duck wells, and we just have an inventory that feeds the frac crews. Record number of wells on production, just shy of 19,000 active wells in April, 18,962 wells. We're starting back up on the orphan well program, and we'll finish that out this summer. So all of the orphan wells that we had identified in that initial grant program will be taken care of this summer. And then this fall, we plan to start the formula grant work. And I've talked about the fact that 70% of that funding is going to go to the brine spill, brine evaporation pond issues in Bottineau and Renville County. So we're excited that that's going to offer up the opportunity to deal with that decades-old problem. It's a 60-year-old problem. Going to get that taken care of over the next couple of years. Activities slowed down on Fort Berthold again, down 2 rigs. Production's holding, but it'll decline if we don't continue to add wells. We've got 9 wells waiting on completion there. U.S. and worldwide storage is in good shape, except for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We're still in the levels that we were at in the 80s right after the reserve was opened. I do have an error in my report. I reported 31% above average for natural gas storage. It should be 24%. And I apologize for that. I didn't catch that until just a short time ago. Gas capture is really looking good. Up 1% statewide Bakken, up 1% Fort Berthold Bakken, up 2% Fee Fort Berthold Bakken. I remember the days when we talked about gas capture lagging on the reservation. It's actually as good or better than off the reservation these days. And so, you know, I'm so proud of the way the gas gathering companies and the operators have stepped up on Fort Berthold. And with the exception of that Twin Buttes area, they're just really rocking it. And that's the one area where we're lagging. And it's because of the topography, and the Little Missouri River really isolates that area. So it's only got 49% gas capture. The other area I'm excited about is Charleston. Line loop's going to go in place. It's at an 89%, so it's almost making the goals. Line loops are going to be done this summer, and we'll see a lot of activity in Charleston. Some of the best rock in the Williston Basin is in Charleston, and it's been held back by the lack of gas gathering infrastructure. The other 2 areas we're watching are around Trenton and up in northwest Williams County and southwest Divide County, where gas capture infrastructure is lagging. And I know there's meetings coming up with the midstream folks and with the operators up there to try to work out how we can accelerate that and get some of the compressor stations like Alamo up and running better. You know where Alamo, North Dakota is. By the way, that's Spanish for cottonwood. So just so you know, there's a lot of cottonwood trees around Lake Alamo. You ought to go there and fish sometime. On the federal rule front, we are now litigating the BLM venting and flaring or waste prevention rule. And Tuesday morning here in Bismarck, there will be a hearing for a preliminary injunction. That is actually going to be the last thing I do as Director of Department of Mineral Resources. I am expecting to be called as a witness at that hearing. And then Tuesday evening, I plan to get on an airplane and fly to Australia. So one of the last things I'll do as Director of DMR is testify in federal court for that preliminary injunction. This is an incredible place to work. And I can't say enough about the way North Dakota has treated me, and what a wonderful time it's been working here for 26 years. So thank you. Thanks for coming to our Director's Cuts and tuning in for our Director's Cuts. I did promise the answer to a couple of questions. The first one that came in over email was the ConocoPhillips Marathon deal. How is it different than the other M&A activity that we've had? And it's similar in some ways, but what this provides is one of our leading companies, ConocoPhillips. It expands their runway. Marathon has a lot of acreage in Bailey and south of the Fort Berthold Reservation that has development potential, and ConocoPhillips had pretty much developed everything that they had going in the basin. So this is an action where a lot more capital can be applied to an area that still has a lot of development potential, a lot of tier 2 rock. ConocoPhillips, as you know, acquired Burlington Resources, so they've got all the railroad minerals in North Dakota. And so it's going to offer both companies an opportunity to expand into areas where they've not been before. So it's kind of similar and yet very different. Some of our mergers and acquisitions have been pure Bakken, quite a few of them, in fact. But in this case, both of these companies are big in the Permian and Eagle Ford and also in the Bakken. So it's going to bring a lot of new ideas and new technologies to areas with that have tier 2 and tier 3 geology, where those technologies can be applied in North Dakota. Another person reached out and was wondering about this week's hearing. One of the most contentious hearings I've ever endured. I guess that's the best word to use for it. It was about Summit Carbon Solutions storage facilities in Oliver County. And the question was, what's the timeline for getting an order to the Industrial Commission? Because obviously these elected officials have to make that decision. We hope we can get an order to those folks the end of September. It might be October, but it'll be in that time frame, either the end of the third quarter or beginning of the fourth quarter of this year. Tremendous amount of information that has to be gone through by a wonderful technical staff, looking at all the modeling and geology and landowner concerns and everything that goes into one of these storage facilities. And this is 3 enormous storage facilities, which will really, change the nature of carbon emissions in the Midwest, in the entire Midwest. So super important. That's the timeline, September, October, somewhere in there. There were comments that were directed at me by a property owner, and the question was about due process. So we'll take that one first. Due process is different for unitization and amalgamation than it is for eminent domain. Unitization, pooling, amalgamation are based on laws that were put in place to prevent waste and protect correlative rights in 1935, starting with Texas and Oklahoma. North Dakota adopted those laws in 1953. And so the due process that's offered there is notice, a public hearing where everybody can appear and voice their comments or concerns. It goes to an application process, and then it goes to the Industrial Commission, who uses the police powers granted by the legislature to protect the correlative rights and prevent waste. Those orders are appealable to district court and all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that's the due process. Under eminent domain, property owners are given a jury trial. So rather than a group of experts, geologists, engineers, landmen, geophysicists, people that understand the geology and the pooling and correlative rights and all of that, rather than that group of people deciding what is equitable, under eminent domain, a 12-person jury decides what you get. It's a very different process. That's one type of due process. We believe that the process the Industrial Commission has laid out through legislation starting in 1953 offers those mineral owners, property owners, pore space owners, adequate due process and the right to appeal to district court, all the way to the Supreme Court, if they're unhappy with the decision. So it's a completely different process when you're dealing with surface development, like building a road or putting in a power line, and you can look at real estate values and that sort of thing. It makes sense that a jury of farmers and ranchers could decide what the right compensation is. When you're dealing with geology, correlative rights, and pressure 2 miles under the ground, we think the right decision can be made by geologists and geophysicists and engineers. So that's the due process argument. Mr. Swenson was arguing that these decisions should be made by 12-person juries. And the state of North Dakota doesn't believe that that's true. They think it ought to be made by technical experts deciding what's equitable for the individuals involved. Interestingly enough, in these 3 major storage units, 90% of the pore space owners have signed on. So it's 10% or less that are objecting. And it's a matter of, you know, what's the right process to help this project through. The other thing that was brought up or asked about was the comment that was made that making the wrong decision is going to result in litigation and endanger Class 6 primacy for the state of North Dakota. Like I already talked about, a due process allows folks that are unhappy with the decision to litigate. And we won't be surprised if that happens in this case, based on the passion behind the 10% or less opposition. As far as endangering our primacy, the EPA primacy only cares about the well bores and the protection of the underground sources of drinking water, period. Our rules are more strict than the federal rules. So there's no threat to our primacy. However, our statute goes further and allows for amalgamation of the pore space owners so they can be equitably compensated. EPA doesn't care about that at all. There's nothing in the federal rules dealing with pore space ownership, amalgamation, or anything like that. So the concerns about that and the concerns about what you do on the surface of the land appears nowhere in the EPA rules. So it's not a concern about the primacy. You always have to be concerned about those things, but you just simply have to follow the rules. And our rules are more stringent than the EPA Class 6 rules. So with regards to primacy, no big concerns. With regard to litigation, it won't be any surprise. With regards to due process, it's a different due process when you're dealing with geology and correlative rights than it is when you're dealing with building something on the surface of someone's land. And so those were the questions I got over the internet, by email. Looks like Bridget has another one, but
Yeah.
we ought to take a couple from the room before we do that, eh?
No problem.
All right.
What could be the what would be like the legal founding for like a lawsuit in this case beyond the with the litigation that's already going on?
Yeah, so the question was, what would be the legal foundation for litigation in this case? And I'm somewhat guessing here because it hasn't been filed, but my expectation would be a constitutional challenge, challenging the constitutionality of Chapter 3822 of the Century Code, which gives the Industrial Commission the police powers to amalgamate pore space and protect everybody's correlative rights. So I anticipate that's what the litigation would be about. There already is a lawsuit about that filed by the Northwest landowners. So information from this hearing more than likely will come up in that already being processed lawsuit, which goes to court this September. So watch for that up in Potno County. Like I talked about, when you're dealing with correlative rights, it isn't just about the rights of the 10% who are objecting. It's also about the rights of the 90+% who want this under their land. And so when you're dealing with geology, you don't have boundaries like you do on, surface, where it's pretty obvious. You can draw a line on the map and you can tell what I own and what you own. But when you're dealing with geology, you're dealing with a rock formation, and stuff moves around down there. So you have to protect correlative rights, and correlative rights are not exactly the same as property rights, but it'll be a constitutional challenge.
If this had, like, if the Supreme Court, or maybe it probably would go to the Supreme Court, like if they disagreed with the state's interpretation of this and said it has to be eminent domain, how much does that change sort of this process? Does it?
Great question, Joey. So the problem is that storage facilities don't qualify under North Dakota's Constitution for eminent domain. They're not common carriers, and they're not public utilities. So there is no process other than the one that we have. They don't qualify for eminent domain under North Dakota's Constitution. What that would mean, more than likely, would be reverting to the Illinois model, which is a pure waste disposal model. You drill a well on a cooperating property owner's land, and you pump waste underground, and everybody outside of that land ownership has to prove that there's trespass. So it falls to trespass law. And there's a court case going on in Illinois right now for ADM's Class 6 well, because they permitted it under the EPA paradigm of a waste disposal well, which doesn't care about pore space ownership, only cares about the well bore and the underground source of drinking water. And so every individual landowner has to figure out a way to prove that there's trespass occurring and prove it to a court.
And last question, obviously this isn't your jurisdiction, but like, what are the consequences if this gets approved, pipeline doesn't? Like, what happens there?
Yeah, so this gets approved and the pipeline doesn't. I anticipate that there will be other projects come forward to bring CO2 to North Dakota. We've already identified that there is about 10 billion barrels of Bakken oil that wants carbon dioxide. And so one way or another, a pipeline importing carbon dioxide is going to come to North Dakota, even if this project doesn't survive. And if this gets approved, there are other technologies that might be applied, like direct air capture or carbon dioxide. If these facilities are sitting there, they're right in the middle of coal country. All the coal plants are going to want to bring their CO2 to these storage facilities rather than build their own. So.
Is there a possibility of a pipeline from Canada, or is that kind of?
There is. There are discussions ongoing right now. The Boundary Dam power plant already has one capture facility constructed and is planning to expand that to capture the carbon off their remaining lignite-fired generation facility. And that CO2 will be looking for a home. It could find a home in a Canadian aquifer or a Canadian oil field, but with the demand for the Bakken down here, it could just as likely find a home being used for EOR in the Bakken.
What is the name of the resource company that is bringing it to southwestern North Dakota?
Oh, it's now owned by ExxonMobil. Denbury Resources is bringing it into Bowman County. And there are some new and recent changes for capture of CO2 sources in Wyoming. So that capture is expanding, and likely that pipeline coming from the southwest will get expanded too.
Well, that might be one option.
That might be another source, correct? Yeah, so we've got CO2 that wants to get here from 3 different directions. From Iowa, from Wyoming, and from Canada. So we're very optimistic that a pipeline will get built, and we'll be able to do EOR in the Bakken.
I don't, who's going to take over temporarily for you?
Mr. Borer, who's sitting back over there, he's the director, assistant director over the oil and gas division. And we had this conversation yesterday. He said he's going to do maybe kind of an abbreviated director's cut until my successor is named, and then we'll see what that person wants to do. But
So have you briefed him about how tough we are on you?
oh yes, yeah. Well, so much so that he came today to observe.
I had just one go.
Oh, you can go ahead.
I was just had one other question. And I think I see the answer, but you're talking about 2,000 or about 2,100 legacy wells,
Yes, sir.
and they produce some, but how many of those are going to go away, do you think, soon?
Yeah, the question was about our legacy assets, and you know, the focus continues to be on development of the Bakken and Three Forks, and so very little capital flows to those legacy assets. Over the time since the Bakken became a big deal, I guess I'd say the last 14 years, we've lost 40% of our legacy assets. They've been plugged and abandoned. If our carbon dioxide import is threatened, those will be the first ones to go. And so I hope that we're able to hang on to that roughly 3,000 wells and 31,000 barrels a day, and actually improve that with enhanced oil recovery. That should be a major goal for the commission and for my successor, is to keep those operating. But things like the BLM venting and flaring rule, we've identified 85 marginal wells that will be subject to shut-in or curtailment under the new rule. So right there, you could lose 100. And we've identified in total about 200 that are threatened by that rule. So they're very fragile economically, Dave, and you know, we could pretty easily lose 25 to 40% of them over the next decade if we don't play our cards right.
The last question, we've seen some.
That sounds so ominous. The last question.
They're saying that we've seen some rained out closures lately. Is North Dakota receiving more rain than usual, or are North Dakotan counties more sensitive to rainfall now? It seems there are less trucks on the road than before due to all the pipeline connections.
Right. So I think I'm going to answer that by saying that North Dakota has worked extremely hard to build pipeline infrastructure to get trucks off the road. And so the vast majority of our oil and gas production now is marketed via pipeline. And so where we see rainfall events and change activity is rig movements and frac crews. That's pretty much the only area that's heavily affected by it. And you know, to give some kudos to our Western Dakota Energy Association, they got funding and put up something called Wise Roads weather stations out in Western North Dakota. And so rather than experiencing county-wide road restrictions when we have a rain event, they're very focused and just centered on the roads that became wet and muddy. So that situation is probably 25% of what it was even 5 years ago. Yeah, if you've lived in North Dakota very long, you know the rainfall varies tremendously year to year. But even in the wet years, we're in far better shape than we were 5, 6, 7 years ago. Yeah. Can I tell my little joke?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a tourist walking through Bergen, Norway one day, and they stopped a little boy and they said, young man, does it rain every day in Bergen, Norway? And he goes, I can't say for sure, I'm only 10. So, yeah. Boo. So, North Dakota is not like Bergen, Norway. It doesn't rain every day, and it isn't steady like that. It's all over the map. But the industry has really made huge strides, along with non-governmental organizations like WDEA, in terms of making life so much better for oil and gas movements out there. With that, I'm going to end with gratitude. Thank you so much for the way you've treated me and for being our honored guests at Director's Cuts number 138. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Pipeline Director, Justin Kringstad.
Perfect. Thank you, Bridget. Justin Kringstad, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll get right in. I'm following, got some emotions. I'll talk about those here later, but I'll work through kind of the nuts and bolts of what you want to hear on the transportation side. So quickly advancing, 2 drilling rigs active in the western part of the basin in eastern Montana. We're seeing some slight increases as well in their production. South Dakota holding steady with no active drilling. And you just received the North Dakota update from Lynn. The bottom part of this graphic is one, again, that has our attention. It's continuing the trend, 2.81 GOR. That is up. That's been the highest since back in 2022, and expecting to see this trend march forward. And so we're still aggressively working on natural gas solutions all the way from the wellhead to the burner tip. So gathering, processing, transmission of the residue gas as well as the natural gas liquids. We'll stay focused on crude oil here. No major changes month to month from March to April. There wasn't anything significant in the marketplace that was occurring. Slide 5 there is just the historic trend. We're continuing to see the pipeline mode of transportation be the dominant method of moving Bakken oil to market. We look at pricing around the U.S. The latest we have was from March, what refineries were paying. A little uptick in that PADD 1. So typically PADD 1, PADD 5, East and West Coast, we're almost on par now, slight, almost a $2 advantage over in that PADD 1 area. When we look at still, though, staying consistent with about 2 trains per day, leaving loaded out of North Dakota, that is down from the 10 to 11 trains per day that we were seeing roughly 10 years ago. The destinations for those crude by rail movements, no surprise then looking at the economics, seeing on the bottom that green portion, about a quarter of the oil now heading back to the East Coast. So they're going to watch, they've got that flexibility with rail movements. There is an appetite for those Bakken barrels if the economics work out for them. And so no surprises here that we see the blend that we do between PADD 1 and PADD 5 here. Pricing update, this was as of the 13th, taking a look around the US. That Brent WTI spread has stayed consistent, sub $5. The one thing that we did see a negative movement was on the Clearbrook pricing. So we had a window where we were back in the positive territory for Bakken oil at Clearbrook. Now back in the negative territory as of that day. Really, it dropped back below. One thing that is impacting the dynamics here in the region, for those here in the Bismarck Mandan area, if you've driven by the refinery in the last number of days, you may have noticed it looked a little different. No steam coming out of the unit. They're down for a maintenance turnaround. That occurs once every 7 years has been the pattern that they've been using there. Because of our ability, though, to move Bakken oil to other destinations during that turnaround period, this is not as severe of an impact as it would have been during previous turnarounds. There was times during these turnaround events that it was crippling to the marketplace, but because of the other alternative transportation, Dakota Access and others, the market impact is much more muted than it would have been historically. As far as just following up on that, regional supply. So how those turnaround events work, they work hard to again build up inventory ahead of time. They will bring in additional inventory from out-of-state refineries through either the Glendive terminal being trucked in, Minot, Fargo terminals, Grand Forks terminals, Jamestown terminals, to meet the local demand during the interim, expecting that refinery to be back up by the end of July. Imports, exports, there is a little bit of news here. This is typically something that I breeze over. This is, again, no major changes at the numbers here, but some project changes. There was a filing at the Canada Energy Regulatory Agency, the CER, to reactivate the Plains Bakken North pipeline, which runs from Trenton up to Regina. That had been idled since 2020, with plans to bring that back into service, looking for a decision by July to reduce the number of truck movements of barrels north out of North Dakota to get that pipeline back into service, delivering barrels from Trenton into the Enbridge system. It's likely going to be a loop back into the U.S., but just logistically getting those barrels in a pipe system versus on the roadway. Moving over to the natural gas side of the world, no changes statewide, gas flaring, and for the reasons of that, Lynn covered that pretty well. Almost back up at record levels of natural gas production, so to continue to see the aggressive stance on gas capture continues to be very encouraging. And at the localized level, again, positive month-to-month news. We're still seeing the number of wells getting connected to gas gathering, matching the new wells coming online. Pricing outlook, slight downward movement, at least in the near term on the EIA's price outlook. They continued to keep their 2025 outlook, but they just shaved a little bit off of their second half of 2024 price outlook. Natural gas processing, continuing to work and look towards options there of what additional plant capacity will look like, either expansions at existing facilities, greenfield facilities, mobile facilities, all of those on the table right now to continue to address our gas capture and processing needs. On the transmission side of the world, a couple updates. Let's slide to slide 18 here. Last time we met a month ago, we were still somewhat working through the maintenance projects on Northern Border. There was one remaining at the end of May. That was even less of an impact than anticipated. So kudos to the team at TC and the folks that were working on these projects. We were able to get through them with really minimal impact to overall gas production and overall industry activity through what was a pretty comprehensive set of projects that could have been more disruptive than they ended up being. So again, hats off to the teams working on those. When we look at slide 19, that market share, this is where that march upward, somewhere still in the neighborhood of that 80 plus, almost reaching 90% market share on Northern Border being Bakken production. So solutions are, like I said earlier, aggressively being worked on to see what is the next set of solutions there that are going to be necessary. One of the things that has been happening, this BTU number, as we see the market share, if it was a status quo condition of how Bakken operations are managing ethane, we would continue to see that BTU level march up. We've actually seen it ramping down, and what's taking place, we're likely seeing some more aggressive ethane capture at the plants that can. By capturing ethane and putting it in the NGL stream, they're able to then make up additional space on the residue systems by keeping that ethane out. And so as we see competition and tightness for space, as there's opportunities for that ethane to go to more advantageous markets, Again, this is a positive sign that there are some tools in the tool bag for those midstream participants to manage capacity, at least in the interim that way. The other thing I wanted to quickly talk about, this is a project that we've, has been publicly talked about for years and years. It's been the goal of many, very aggressive push from the public officials down in the Wahpeton area. So again, kudos to them for all the hard work over the years. Construction is now just getting underway for that Wahpeton expansion project. You can see the pipe being laid out, some of the right-of-way work just getting outlined. No major construction yet, but all the preliminary phases are in full swing. So we're excited to see that project progress through the summer with the target of being in service later this year. So with that, I'll finish, Lynn. Thank you. Yeah, the first time I talked to Lynn was 2005. I begged him for a job up at the core library. So almost 19 years ago, I've been working for or with Lynn. This has been a phenomenal ride over those years. Thank you for the mentorship, the support. I always knew you had my back. A lot of ups and downs and everything in between. So thank you for everything. So you're going to be missed. I can guarantee all of you, Mark and I are not going to have jokes at the next director's cut. But those may be a thing of the past. Hopefully, we can keep you entertained. So, are there any questions?
If they are, there'll be better jokes.
I do have a question. You talked about that Bakken North pipeline.
Yes.
Why was it shut down?
So it was. So the question was about the kind of the history of that line from Trenton up to the Enbridge system. It was shut down in 2020. If you remember, 2020 was a time of turmoil, right? We had production dropping. The need for that project was just not there. But again, market conditions today with the Trans Mountain project coming on in Canada, potentially opening up some capacity on that Enbridge main line. The project economics start to look attractive again. So.
Then we have another question here.
Yep.
Another question is, please share which refineries down for maintenance that is affecting clear price.
So I can't say directly that is the cause for it, but the refinery that is under maintenance is the Marathon Petroleum refinery in Mandan, 68,000 barrel per day capacity. It's North Dakota's only crude oil refining capacity or project or refinery in the state. So
When do they expect to have it? Do you know when that maintenance is supposed to be done?
by the end of July is the target. Yep.
I had another question, but this question I asked a lot. What's the status of any particular gas processing coming online?
Gas processing. So that, yes, still projects in the works. Nothing public yet between the major players. It's kind of a fine dance between having plant capacity, transmission capacity. Those have to kind of go hand in hand. You can have all the plant capacity in the world. If you don't have a transmission line supporting that plant, it's tough to make formal and firm decisions on that. So those two kind of have to match up. Our current plant capacity works well with the current gas transmission and natural gas liquids capacity until we can firm up some of those larger transmission projects. Then you will then see hand in hand some of those processing projects as well.
I had one and just would like to say, apologize. One of that big project that they're going to take a look at, the Public Service Commission looking at, is it Celeron or?
Oh, Sirloin, yes.
Celeron.
Yep.
How's that going to affect things?
Yep, so the Sirloin project up in Trenton would be it'd be North Dakota's largest natural gas consumer so far. There's some big power generation announcements as well that would be at the similar type of scales. So any in-state use for that natural gas, assuming it's Bakken gas, that the feedstock into those facilities is going to help alleviate some of the residue concerns that we have. A lot of our in-state projects, whether it's Sirloin, whether it's power generation, one important component that you'll probably hear me start talking about more in the coming months and going forward is going to be gas storage. It's one thing, especially when you start talking about power plants, they do not run 24/7. The oil field runs 24/7 and it needs gas takeaway and gas solutions 24/7. So the ability to store natural gas, to work through the ebbs and flows of that particular sector of the marketplace is going to be very important. We sit right in our backyard is North America's largest single gas storage field, WBI's Baker facility. So there is opportunities. However, the challenge is gas capacity to and from that storage field to where these new demand locations will be. So that'll be something else that, you know, in the coming months and years, you'll see more and more development on that front.
There's another question here.
Yep.
Do you know which units are under maintenance at Mandan's refinery and when maintenance started?
So the maintenance started earlier this month. As far as this is a full turnaround. They're going to go top to bottom of that whole facility and work through everything they can. Now is the time to get it done. So. Okay, well, thank you all very much. We'll see you next month.